Sibelius and NotePerformer are in many ways an excellent combination, but still playback can often sound rigid, especially in slower, expressive music. There are several ways of creating a more expressive feel using articulation, phrasing, vibrato, rubato, and dynamics. In this video, we'll start by looking at ways in which we can make Sibelius playback sound a little more realistic by adding some rubato and subtle variations to dynamics. So the very first thing we need to do is prepare a copy of our score. There are different ways to do this, but my preferred method is simply to save it with the words for audio added to the file name. Because as you'll see, there can be some drastic modifications made to an original score in order to make the playback more convincing. Let's use as an example the opening of Debussy's Prelude à l'après-midi d'un faune. If you know this piece, you'll know that it's always, without exception, played with a good deal of expression and rubato, so it's good for demonstrating some of the ideas I want to share with you. To start with, I've indicated a tempo of quaver, or eighth note, equal to 96 beats per minute, which is fairly typical for this piece. Let's hear it played back just as it is. I'm sure you noticed how rigid it sounds when compared to a typical live performance. So the first thing we're going to do is add some rubato. We'll do this in two ways. Firstly, by indicating tempo changes, and then by adding very small values to existing note lengths. But before doing anything here, I'm going to put a system break at the end of the first line, because you'll notice that once the tempo, accelerando and ritardando markings are added, it will be so crowded that it will be difficult to read. First, we'll input some tempo changes. And then some accel and rit lines. Of course, you'll want to experiment with this and get the exact tempo changes that you want for your piece, but do take note that at the end of accelerando or ritardando lines, you need to indicate the tempo for them to end on. Straight away, we can hear that it sounds rather more flexible. Since in this example the first bar is repeated, we can copy it. The usual method would be to highlight the bar and simply press R. But if we do this, we notice that only the notes are copied. To copy all the tempo changes that we've just made, we need to first highlight the bar, then go to the home page and select System Passage. You'll notice that it then highlights the whole bar plus the tempo changes. We can then copy it by pressing R as usual, and you see that everything from this bar has been duplicated. By the way, this also applies if you want to copy to a different location in your score using copy and paste. So now we've actually got the second bar of the piece twice, so we'll go ahead and delete the original second bar. Now, in the interest of realism, you may want to vary some of the tempo markings in the second bar just to make it sound a little bit more human. It would never be exactly the same. So let's go ahead and do that now. Now let's hear the whole phrase. Okay, It's beginning to sound a little more lifelike. Now we'll adopt a similar procedure for the third and fourth bars. We add tempo markings, then some accelerando and ritardando indications to simulate the rubato that a real player might apply in performance. Another way to simulate rubato is to add a very small value to an existing note length. Now, this extract is in 9/8 time, and I want to add just a 30-second note to the last note of each of the first two bars. So the first thing we need to do is calculate the number of 30-second notes in the 9/8 bar. This will be 9 times 4, since there are 4 30-second notes in an eighth note. Of course, the total for the whole bar is 36. Now, since we're going to add a 30-second note to the end of the bar, we need a 37/32 time signature. We have to add this by going to the Notations tab, then Time Signature menu, and then create it via the fields at the very top. So there we have it, the basic bar with a 30-second note added. Well, I think that sounds a little bit too much, so we'll change it to a 64th note. This is quite simple, since all we need to do is double the numbers in the time signature and subtract 1 from the top one, and we have a 73/64 bar. We create that the same way as before. Let's play that back and see how it sounds. Now, the other thing I want to do is to note that a player, especially in a passage like this one, would inevitably vary the dynamics during the longer notes. So again, for the sake of emulating this, I'm going to add a crescendo to the first half of each phrase, followed by a diminuendo. I'll vary it slightly on the second bar. Do bear in mind, though, that for these crescendos and diminuendos to play back effectively, you need to add a new dynamic marking at the end of each one. But let's compare before and after. So there we are, the first steps in creating a more expressive feel and therefore more realistic playback in Sibelius. There's still more to be done, however, because you'll notice in this example the flute's vibrato is fairly constant in level and in speed, therefore a bit too mechanical sounding. A real player, of course, would vary this, and so I'll address that together with articulation and phrasing in the next video. I hope this one has been useful to you. If you have any comments or questions, please do leave them in the comments section below. Please do share this and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video in the planned series of how to make Sibelius playback more realistic. Thanks very much for joining me, and I very much hope that you will join me again.